I will now turn the call over to Mr. Doug Hutton, Executive Advisor with the Marketing Leadership Council. You may proceed, sir.
Thank you very much, Regina. I appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking an hour out of your mornings or afternoons to join us here today at the MLC. We're certainly excited about today's teleconference, although the title of today's teleconference may be a little bit verbose. I'm excited to have several guests with us on the teleconference today from two companies, MTV Networks, as well as Marketing Evolution. It's a case study that we've been working closely with both of them on, and I'm really excited to share it with you today. But before I go any further, let me do a couple of brief introductions as to who we have on the call today. As Regina said, I'm Doug Hutton. I'm an executive advisor here with the council. But also joining me today, we have Todd Cunningham, the Vice President of Consumer Insights for MTV Networks. And we also have Damon Burrell, Vice President of Marketing for MTV as well. Last but not least, we have Rex Briggs, who's the CEO of Marketing Evolution, a vendor that you'll hear a little bit about as we go through the case study as well. Todd, Damon, and Rex will be contributing to the conversation as we go, and I hope you take advantage of the knowledge that they bring to the table today with some good Q&A as we go forward. But let's move beyond the slightly verbose title, if you will, and get into really the key challenges that brought us to this case study here today. And you sort of see those challenges called out in the top part of this page. New challenges call for new tools. I don't think anyone on the line today would argue with the fact that today's Marcom and media environment is getting more fragmented, is more splintered, and has more touch points than ever before. And frankly, for many of our members here at the council, that is becoming, in part for some, an intractable challenge. And you see some of the trends in consumer media behavior that's driving this challenge at the top of the page. Splintering media consumption. Certainly, too, the rise of multitasking and smartphones. It's getting more and more difficult for us as marketers to understand the media consumption behavior of consumers. And number three, the explosion of data trails. There's so much data. It's not that all this new stuff is not measurable. It's just that we may not have the time in terms of overload to do this and actually squeeze insight from the information that consumers are giving us. And so what we found, and this is not just unique to MTV Networks, but the problem statements that you see on the bottom of the page are two that we hear from many of our members. Problem number one is that we have more products, more channels, more geographies to allocate resources to, but as a result, that process becomes more and more complicated by the hour. The second major problem is then even if we've determined what products we are going to market, our media planning doesn't really work either because historically it's been optimized to the efficiency of each channel rather than the overall effectiveness of the objectives we're trying to achieve. And so why we're excited to bring today's case study to you from MTV Networks and their partnership with Marketing Evolution is because of the two solutions that they've brought to those challenges that may seem right now a bit intractable. We'll talk first about the solution on the lower left, assumption-driven portfolio allocation, and you can essentially jot this down as how do we decide what to market. And on the right-hand side, we'll then talk about their solution of objective-based media optimization, which is essentially, if you want to jot it down, how to market it. But let's dive in first to that first solution, assumption-driven portfolio allocation on the left, and take a look at the next page. What we're seeing with our members, just a little bit more blown out here, is, as the title would suggest, a resource allocation Rubik's Cube, if you will. And you see there the proliferation of number of products that any given one of us is trying to sell, the number of Marcom channels we have available to us, and the number of geographies that we're trying to get into as well. Not only that complicating the process, we also probably have more stakeholders involved in the process than we've ever had before. I'm sure you've probably been sitting in a meeting where you've heard one or more of the quotes from each of the individuals that you see around that Rubik's Cube. Some folks have a short-term focus. Some folks have a long-term focus. Some folks have a budget focus. Some folks want to spend all the money in the world. Obviously, new products versus existing products. There's just so many tensions within this Rubik's Cube. And ultimately, we come to a point there where it's just unproductive. You have these folks in a room that are trying to make resource allocation decisions, and it's just incredibly difficult if you don't have the framework to do it. So what happens? Take a look down at the bottom of the page. and this is what our members tell us all the time, is that the organization simply settles for the resource allocation that they've done in the past. At best, they're allocating it based on what they did last year. At worst, it's the gut feeling as to what's going to change going forward. Either way, all of those stakeholders around the Rubik's Cube at the top of the page have very low confidence that the outcome that they've achieved during this process is actually optimal. Certainly, as it gets worse in terms of the media splintering, we're always reminded of David Ogilvy's maxim as it comes to advertising. We don't know which half of our advertising is effective. And I think the key quote down the lower left-hand side of your page is indicative of that as well. When the Budget Act falls mid-year, cuts get made arbitrarily because we don't have a clear rationale for why we invested where we did. No one ends up happy. So that's the preface, if you will. Before we get into the actual case study, I did want to toss it over just for a couple of minutes to Damon Burrell at MTV Networks. And Damon, thanks very much for joining us. Before we dive in, I'd love to just get your take a little bit on that challenge and how that challenge led you at MTV to really dive into the process that we're going to talk about today.
Sure. I mean, to be honest, I think you did an amazing job at setting it up and really kind of, talking about those challenges. But just to provide it a little bit more color, for me, before we started on this project, I saw, and I think all of my colleagues would agree that, more and more marketing executives were and still are being asked to kind of show and prove how they are making decisions regarding how and where they're spending their overall marketing budgets. So, for me specifically, I was in a place where, I had an infinite number of priorities or shows, for that matter, to promote, but with a finite amount of money and budget. And that amount of money was actually decreasing in some cases. In addition to that, because of the declining market and also just the nature of our business, our business measures were declining, whether it's revenue or earnings per share or stock price, et cetera. During those times, you also start to receive those requests from the CFOs of the organization and the CEOs of the organization to really provide perspective on what is the return on investment for everything that you're doing. So because of that, because of those, those forces of nature all coming together at one given time, we reached out to Marketing Evolution to help us basically develop a set of tools that could help us decide out of all of the portfolio of shows that we had, where was the biggest upside if we were to place our bets and spend our money. And then once we figured that piece out, how do we allocate the amount of money that we do have in a way that's going to give us the biggest upside against our objectives being increasing awareness or increasing intent to view, and then the ultimate goal, increasing ratings overall. So, a lot of external factors basically pushed us to start to figure out internal solutions on how we can be smarter and more strategic on how we're making decisions on where we're putting our money. And then once we do get that money to spend, what's the best way to allocate it in order to achieve our objectives, the ultimate objective being tune-in.
Sure. Fantastic. Thanks, David. That's actually a great lead-in to the next page that we'll put up on the screen for you to talk about the first tool that MTV Networks developed in partnership with Marketing Evolution. And you heard Damon just sort of overview it a little bit, and let me just give you a little bit more color. If we think about the Rubik's Cube that we just saw on the same page and stakeholders being pulled in different directions and not really having the same decision criteria, if you will, step one in this process is getting folks actually to agree on what the decision criteria are when determining where they are going to place their bets. So again, we're talking about MTV Networks here. So the bubbles that you see in the chart each represent a specific television program against which MTV could place marketing dollars. And what MTV wanted to do, and you see the X and Y axis here, is through a substantive interviewing process with stakeholders, trying to arrive at the short list of decision factors that will help determine which shows are going to get the dollars and which won't. And take a first look at your Y-axis, and I know it's written horizontally, but the Y-axis there is opportunity strength. How strong is our opportunity for these TV programs? You see metrics like content strength, talkability, ratings potential. Similarly, for those council members who have been around with us a while, you've seen opportunity fit matrices like these before, and you see down on the bottom the decision factors for fit. Things like, does it fit with our brand image? Does it fit with the audience we're going after? IP ownership and the association of talent. But I think the key addition to this, that we're in a good place with opportunity and fit, we're in a much better place if we add that size of the bubble that you see on the right-hand side, where the bubble size is, as Damon was just talking about, is essentially how much upside is there for marketing to spend on this program versus another. And what we mean by that is essentially, what is the potential contribution of that program to those metrics that Damon was just talking about? How much value would the money that we invest create on the back end? And so this matrix here, and I'll take you to the actual tool here shortly, which can actually help with this, but developed a few key takeaways. Developed by stakeholder interviews to help capture that list of decision factors. Those factors are then filtered so that we're getting to the right factors for opportunity, fit, strength, and marketing upside. And ultimately, the stakeholders together review the framework and then collectively sign off individual brand teams on it as they go forward. One thing I know, and feel free, Todd, Damon, or Rex, to hop in here, that I know our members are interested in as I've been talking to them about this case study, is how did you arrive at the consensus with those key stakeholders during that interviewing process? Obviously, we saw on the previous page that they are often in many different directions. How were you guys able to get to a very tight list of factors that folks could agree on? What did that look like in your organization?
Well, this is Todd Cunningham. So being the kind of facilitator for the initiative itself, coming through research is really critical because it's like there are lots of a growing list of measures and ways of measuring and things like that that are actually becoming more and more valuable. And the great thing about this tool was that it allowed us to have a framework to allow lots of voices around the table to be heard. So we did this across 6 of our brands here. MTV was one of the first ones to actually to kick it off. Damon and his counterparts determined were critical to the mix. And so different channels have different voices who are important into the mix. So we did it basically in working with Marketing Evolution to have a process of like, these are the kind of questions we will be asking, give them time to answer them, come back, debate them, submit them back to Rex and his team. They go off and do their bits, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, and then come back and share that with the team. Make a lot of checks and balances, of course, making sure that the marketing lead is the person navigating the effort at large. But really, it was about setting up a framework to actually have the conversation, just to have the kind of conversation that everyone wanted to have or that was happening in a very informal, kind of unstructured way to just put more rigor and discipline around it.
Absolutely. And let's actually flip to the next page, show folks a bit of a screen capture from that tool and a couple of good things. For those of our members on the phone, just to add some additional credibility to what is already a great tool, members of ours in our corporate strategy board are actually using similar tools like this to get stakeholder buy-in to corporate strategies writ large. So what marketing is doing here is actually a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of what corporations are doing writ large from a strategy perspective. But what you see here in the screen capture, you see those factors captured down the left-hand side of your page. So as we were talking about, things like the show's content strength, its ratings potential, et cetera. And you see the different, as you move from left to right, first in the first column, the different weight assigned to each of those factors. Obviously, some are more important than others. And then as you continue to move left to right, you see how those ratings would play out for each of the different shows within that brand's portfolio. I have to say I was very much looking forward to today's teleconference because it gave me an excuse to talk about Jersey Shore in an actual marketing context, which is fantastic. But as you look at the screen capture there and at the call-out box, particularly on the top right-hand side of your page, at the beginning of these process, every stakeholder, once they've bought into the actual factors themselves, can provide their ratings for each of the shows as to where they see that show performing on that given factor, ultimately leading up to the front screen capture where you can see the composite scores. The really cool part about this, and Rex, I'd love to toss it to you here in a second for a little bit more color, but the cool part of this from our perspective here at the Council is this is all dynamic. So none of this is really hidden. So if somebody wants to change a score, or if folks want to do some scenario planning, which I'll show a little bit more on the next page shortly, you can move the numbers around to see what would that look like. What would that change in allocation look like if we were to, let's say, change the weight for a given factor, if we were to change the score for a given program? What does that look like? And that scenario planning, that forward-looking assumption, is much more powerful than that backwards-looking media planning we talked about earlier. But Rex, while we've got you on the line, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about the tool, and in particular, sort of the thinking behind it.
Yeah, thank you. The tool really is designed to both take the executive judgment that comes into these decisions as well as data streams. So one of the things that also plugs into these tools is that if you have, for example, the second item down there is how buzzworthy a show is, so if that's something that you have quantitative measurement for, that can directly feed into the tool with a score already pre-populated and locked in. So you begin to focus people's attention on where there truly is marketers' judgment that's going in, and you begin to connect together the data that you have across the enterprise to help make those decisions more fact-based. So it really is that blend of the art and science that we know goes into portfolio decision-making. And it puts it in a place that's very transparent and easy for people to see. And as you mentioned, if there are disagreements between how different people see a certain score, you can very quickly see, well, does it matter? I mean, does that really, that one score that we disagree upon, does that change the decision that we make? And if so, then let's really have a deep dive discussion. If not, then okay, you give it a 4, I give it a 5. It doesn't change the fact that it makes it a second-tier priority or a first-tier priority or whatever. And that is something that we really wanted to help Damon and the other teams within MTV Networks be able to do much more efficiently and much more transparently in their process.
Sure. Fantastic. Thanks, Rex. And as you look at the next page that we're going to put up on the screen here, a couple additional screen captures from the tool that I think illustrate exactly the point that Rex was just talking about. I've made that scenario capability point on the top right-hand side. But as you can see, even for this particular example on the page, if, let's say, folks were arguing a little bit about the given score of a given attribute, they could determine if that would make a difference. You see the portfolio bubble chart, which looks exactly at strength, fit, and again, the size of the bubble is the upside. Even as you move from the top left graphic to the top right graphic, you can see that that doesn't really change overall, even with that one small change, how that actually would play out from a marketing allocation perspective. The output of all of this, though, which I think is equally as important, is you see the graphic in the lower right-hand side of your page. In terms of the sample output, you see the strength factors, SF, and the fit factors, FF, and then the optimal spend that should be allocated across those. Obviously, there's sort of a set pot of money to go. But as I mentioned a little bit earlier, if you're midway through a year and have to make a tough budget decision as to where those dollars move, this is actually a pretty quick way to, through those capabilities and through those different scenario plans, to determine where could we reallocate that money throughout our program portfolio. Damon, I'd love to bring you back into the conversation here for a quick second. You were sort of one of the guinea pigs, I believe, for the process. I'd love to just hear how this tool for you guys at this stage potentially changed or helped you have better conversations with the stakeholders involved in the planning process.
Well, it definitely adds, and I think Rex said this, it definitely adds a certain level of transparency around the decision-making process that myself, the people on my team, and my peers go through when making these decisions. This is one of those situations where every marketer already does the majority of this already, but it's done either in a vacuum or it's done within someone's own kind of mental capacity. What we've seen and what we've been able to showcase is that unless you are a master at three-dimensional chess, it's basically impossible to factor, so many different variables at any given time and come to a kind of, strategic conclusion on the best way to do it, unless you can model it out with the tool in this way. So, once we got past that hurdle and that understanding, I think, everyone saw the value at being able to utilize this tool, and then it makes the conversations a lot easier. From there, it's really, well, what does the tool say? Everyone believes in it. Everyone understands the way that it works. Everyone sees the value. So then it actually makes our jobs a lot easier. So when we do come to the table and say, for 2011, we're going to be placing our dollars in our overall budget, then there's less time spent on, well, how did you come up with that decision? Because everyone was actually involved. There's transparency on how the decisions are made.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think one of the key things that we like here at the council about the tool and about this process in general is what you see here on this page, the iterative nature of the tool, particularly as Rex mentioned, some of the factors, because they are fed by data. It is quite easy to see within the tool if some of the assumptions that were made are not panning out, either positively or negatively. And so what you're seeing in the graphic here on the page is just one of those variables on the y-axis, talkability, sort of that word of mouth. And you can see each of the letters across the bottom of the page representing a given television program. Each X corresponding to what was the assumed talkability about that program. But you see under the reality shows the possibility that when the data comes back, there's a much different actual performance than there is under the planning, than was under the planned performance. And so as a result, this can get quickly baked right back into the tool. And as Damon mentioned, the trust that is built as a result, this goes back into the tool. It changes the planning assumptions a little bit. And as a result, it can change where that allocation goes throughout the portfolio. And so that assessment of actual performance versus planned performance can constantly contribute to the iterative nature of the tool. And Todd and Damon, I'd love to. One of my members asked me this question, and I'd love to just get your take on it. How often have you guys sort of gone back to the tool now that you've sort of been through it once, maybe twice? If something like this were to occur, what sort of steps have you guys taken internally to ensure that it does get back into the tool and then it gets updated in terms of where our resource allocation goes?
Sure, I'm definitely let Damon answer that, because basically what we did in our corporate role was to help facilitate a unified approach, just a framework that each of the teams could then take and kind of mold to their needs. Not some brands needed, had like a long list of inputs, and some had shorter ones. We have a number of different data streams, which of course come in on a very frequent basis. Some brands need that, on a weekly or more frequent basis. Some look at it more like in a month roll-up kind of thing. So, in terms of the frequency of updating, I'll let Damon throw to that. But we have not. It's basically their tool. It's theirs to act on.
Sure.
So I'll respond by saying that we've utilized this tool on a number of occasions. Our planning process is definitely fluid. We have new priorities and new shows that are coming in and out of our slate at any given time, so there's a constant need to have to readjust and reassign priorities. But getting at the heart of the question, we're always going back and readjusting. Marketing is a mix of both art and science. This tool definitely brings a lot of the science into it, but then at the same time, it's up to the art of a marketer and their own kind of subjective experience to be able to make the decisions based off of the data and the information that they have and the direction that they're getting from utilizing a tool like this. So we are constantly adjusting. We're looking at the results that come from the tool and then kind of readjusting and putting information back in before we can make a final decision. But I think the key answer to the question, that there's always going to be a mix of both art and science.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the interesting thing that you said, Damon, that I don't believe is always the case for some of our members is the fact that it's sort of always going back and reevaluating. I think oftentimes for some of our members, planning becomes sort of the once a year, once every 6-month process. But the iterative nature of it and the constant desire to go back and reevaluate, I think, is a pretty key takeaway.
Well, also, this is Todd. I would just say that, like, from a consumer advocacy position, it's like we can no longer afford to look at to like not be continuous about all this kind of stuff, right? I mean, it's like we just the data, not just because the data is there, but because the dynamic is changing so much, and the dynamic is changing in terms of like important in important ways for marketers to be responsive and to be kind of open to understanding what the data means. That's a new kind of role for research to be playing, is also to help our marketing clients in particular understand how and why the data changes the way it does. Not just report on it, but also like be able to make course corrections in real time.
Yep.
And if I could just, this is Rex, if I could just share a quick anecdote. So the example I'm going to share is one where a person had built a plan, and then they did it based upon assuming that the product was going to be of a certain quality. The show was going to test really well, and then it didn't. But, you know, they didn't get that score until like the week before they were supposed to start spending their marketing money. And I'm sure that there are some people on the phone that probably can relate to that situation. You build a plan months in advance based on certain assumptions. As the facts come in, the fact picture looks different. What the tool allows you to do very easily is to change that score and see if that actually leads you to change your course of action. And I think that that's just a really powerful, just Todd and Damon's point. I mean, that's just the way business needs to work these days. You can't just sort of lock yourself into a plan and say, but we decided to spend this money a year ago, so we're going to spend, throw good money after bad. If you see the back picture change, this makes it really easy to see why you need to reallocate and reset priorities.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good transition here as we look at the page on the screen right now in terms of before and after. What does this enable us to shift to? And I think these are, regardless of whether or not you use a tool exactly like the one that MTV Networks is using here, I think the principles you see here are ones that we here at the Council will certainly advocate for in moving from the incremental approach to allocating our dollars on the left-hand side, which yields the low stakeholder confidence that we saw at the beginning of the case, to this assumption-driven allocation on the right-hand side, which is forward-looking, which is fact-based, and as you heard Rex say, in as many cases as possible, fed by real data, which gives us the high stakeholder confidence in the decisions that we are making. And as you heard Damon say, a lot of buy-in from the internal folks, knowing that we've held hands on this, that there's good data feeding into it, and we have to move quickly to ensure that the changes in consumer habits that we see every day are baked into the planning processes that we have. But if that's step one of the process, in terms of looking on the left-hand side of this page, problem number one, as we just went through, we have to allocate our dollars based on forward-looking assumptions. There's still the second problem, which is, okay, we've picked in this instance, which programs we are going to action against, but we still need to figure out what does the media planning approach look like. Because our typical media planning optimizes to efficiency, not effectiveness. And so here we're looking at what we call objective-based media optimization. And before I get too far into that, though, and again bring Rex into the conversation, again, just a little bit more detail on what we've seen from our members in terms of optimizing for efficiency rather than effectiveness. Don't get me wrong, efficiency is still a good thing, and especially over the past couple of years, as our members have been certainly strapped for dollars and strapped for more dollars than they otherwise would. Don't get me wrong that efficiency is something you don't want to care about. But that said, our traditional media mix modeling that you see sort of in the methodology box at the bottom of the page is just that. It's a mathematical optimization of impressions delivered against our target audience, and again, constrained by our budget, which naturally, which gives us the false, we believe, assumption that you see in the blue box at the very bottom of the page, which is that all touch points deliver equivalent effectiveness regardless of marketing objective. Now, I'm sure most of the folks on the phone today probably dialed in because in some sense that they know that assumption is false, and they are trying to change the way the organization thinks about that assumption so that we don't just get an efficiency output, as you see in the top right-hand box on your page, but we move from efficiency to effectiveness so that we can really determine, are we getting to the right marketing objectives, and do we have the right marketing communications mix to make that a reality? So if that's the case, if we want to move from efficiency to effectiveness, here's how Marketing Evolution and MTV Networks have come together to do this, in fact. A couple of things. Obviously, this needs a substantial amount of inputs, and you see those two inputs on the left-hand side of your page. A database of in-market MarCom performance, as well as ongoing tests. For those of you on the call who have been tracking our marketing communications work and also our social media work over the past year and a half, you know that we are huge believers here at the Council of test and learn, and that's exactly what's happening here on the lower left-hand side of the page. Putting those two things together enables us to figure out what for each given touch point, and you see TV called out in the three graphics on the right-hand side, what's the different levels of effectiveness against different objectives? So TV may be great, let's say, at aided awareness, but it may not be quite as great as it is for brand prestige, the top one on the page. You could similarly make charts like you see on the right-hand side, impact on the Y, spend on the X, for any given touch point if you've got the data. Obviously, this does require a little bit of database building, but Rex, I'd love to hear from you in particular, sort of a little bit of the ins and outs here. I know for some of our members, this may be a bit of a new concept. I know we've worked with you and Ford before on how they've leveraged this process, but I'd love to just hear from you as to how sort of this database of in-market performance and these ongoing tests enable us to track different touch points against these different objectives.
Sure. And as you pointed out, the Ford case study is another good one in a totally different industry that helps to illustrate some of these points. But the most important point I think that you made that is a ground-setting point is that marketers know in their hearts, they know in their minds that different that there are different types of objectives that they have to deal with, and those require different type of media mixes. To be very specific in entertainment, and then to make it a little bit more general, for MTV Networks or any entertainment brand really, we know that there's a very distinct different pattern between launching a new show, where you're going after trying to build new customers, versus marketing a returning series where you're really trying to market to your existing customers. And to make that more general, that's a pattern that you see in CPG and a lot of other categories as well, which is that the dynamics of marketing to new customers is different than the dynamics of marketing to an existing customer. A lot of that, to make the next step forward, is the reason why those dynamics are different is because in going to a new customer, you have to build awareness and interest and connect in at a certain point that your brand is relevant and set up certain cues so that people think about that brand when they're in that buying behavior pattern. And that's a little bit different than what you need to do for marketing to an existing customer, where you just really have to re-cue them to remember what they love about your brand and get them to buy you again. And that's very similar in television, where as you begin to look at the media mix that does a really good job at building awareness and relevance for a new customer, that's a different set of media mix than the media that is good at reinforcing and driving conversion among existing customers. So that's just one example of how your different objectives, whether it's going after new customers or existing customers, lead to different media mixes, because we know different media perform differently in achieving the different type of communication objectives.
Sure.
So what we've done is we've measured literally billions of dollars of marketing campaigns and surveyed millions of consumers and run modeling on sales behavior and ratings and so on, in hundreds of campaigns. and we've developed a normative database that allows marketers to get a quick start in their category at what those patterns should look like depending on their objectives and goals. Mm-hmm. And that's what MTV used to get started, and they're now looking at whether or not they should conduct their own proprietary research to fuel that data. But the fact that there's a lot of normative data allows people to get over that hurdle of, gosh, I don't have the data, or I don't have the time or the money to do big analysis. You can get started at least with normative information in a pretty quick manner.
Yep. And Rex, you made a great point there at the end, and I know probably some of our members have been thinking about this throughout the call as to what is the price tag of all this going to cost me. And don't worry, folks, I've got a little bit of an answer for you at the back of our presentation here, so stay tuned for that in particular. But similar to the portfolio allocation that we were talking about a little bit earlier, I've just pulled up on your screen sort of, again, a screenshot of the media optimization tool that Rex was just giving us a little bit of background on the screen in front of you. And just to go through the tan call-out boxes that you see down the right-hand side of your page, there's certainly, again, the ability to make adjustments and the ability to plan for different scenarios so that you can get that holistic assessment of marketing communications. Also, as you see in the second tan call-out box, probably important for a lot of marketers, obviously there's certainly a lot of statistical analysis that's going in here, but the good part about the tool is that marketers in your organization don't necessarily have to have the statistical background to do that. And you see where that arrow is pointing to as external factors, things like competitive activity, innovation, et cetera. We're not using statistical numbers there. We're trying to get that sort of, we call it ordinal scoring, if you will, but using words, which is often a little bit easier. But then again, flexibility in planning to optimize the media mix is what you see in that third call-out box. As Rex was just talking about, what are the different metrics that we are trying to achieve, the different objectives? And you see the objective there, intent to tune in. That's going to be different than the objective of brand awareness. And it's going to be different than the objective of returning users, as Rex was just talking about. But again, I don't want to necessarily dwell on the precise ins and outs of the tool here. But again, the overarching point: make it simple for folks to make allocation decisions that's smart, sort of the normative basis that Rex was just referring to. And then also, what's the best allocation for a particular objective? How should I allocate the money that I have to get me the best result as you go through? You see down at the bottom, the very bottom of the tool, there's no call-out box to it, but you see the media and recommendation allocation down at the bottom. And then also you see in the red highlighted area towards the lower right of your page the actual results that would come through. So again, much like with the portfolio-driven resource allocation up front, we can determine by getting real data on the back end what is the impact of the media mix that we are putting out into the marketplace. The goal of all this, though, is simplicity. There's a lot of good statistical stuff going on behind this, but the simpler we can make it for the marketers using it is going to increase uptake. And I know, Todd, we've quoted you here on the lower left-hand side of the page towards that point, boiling it down to simple things that marketers and market researchers can use in the planning process.
Yeah, it's the tricky thing. We've been talking about all the sunshiny things about this whole process, yeah. And I would say that there are challenges along the way, and I'm sure people are probably asking themselves, what's the balance, because it can't all be so perfect. I would say that the keeping your eye focused on simplicity is probably the hardest thing. You can keep it focused there, but it's because there are so many factors that have just that come in at any given moment to be important to factor in the mix. Is you just have to be. I think it's really just around being kind of consistent and having those open conversations as frequently as possible. And then through that, it allows you to get to the point of simplicity, and you start to learn what matters and learn to measure what matters most. There is the inverse relationship thing of the more data sources you put in, the less simple this is, and meaning the more confusing it possibly could be to someone across the table from you. So striving towards simplicity is critical.
Absolutely. couple more points I wanted to make here, and we pulled up the slide on the screen, course correcting. Obviously, the goal of all this, much like with the earlier resource allocation in terms of what to market, is obviously to change our mix as we continue to go forward. And I think typically here we see members with what we call the launch and leave approach. It's here's what we planned, let's do it, see how it goes. Actual, though, in terms of this model, is how can we change this in the moment? So you see the graphic on the page, again, against each objective, a given target audience, and then with the data stream, starting to develop some of these curves in terms, what's the incremental progress towards our objective on the y-axis, again here, intent to tune in, against how much we're going to spend. And again, how much can we optimize against any one of those? You see the two blue boxes on the bottom, which I think are critical points. The whole point here is test and learn, rapid learning loops, discovering what these performance curves actually look like. And then the one on the right-hand side, combining the data from different touch points, certainly enables us to make those shifts that we need that we've talked about. The goal, though, particularly in today's media environment, again, if you've been with us here at the Council for a while, you know that even in just the past 18 months where we've produced so much social media research, the number of tools and platforms that are out there from a social media perspective have changed vastly. And with the efficiency-based media planning on the left-hand side of this page, it doesn't let us get into some of those new channels because they are unproven and we don't know how to use them properly. But here, as we move to the right-hand side of having an objective-based media optimization approach, it can let us take advantage of some of these newer models because we can quickly see how they're impacting our mix. If you take a look, though, one of the points that is not right on the page, if you will, but is in the last bullet point down on the left-hand column, which is just interesting for us here at the Council. There are a couple of additional benefits here. Again, not to sound too rosy about stuff, but I think these are important. You can use this as an alternative view to really horse race against the media plans that your agencies are producing. So how are they kind of getting the message as well, and are they starting to line up with what's working in your organization? Similarly, the second bullet point down there, global visibility into media buys. We can start to see some best practice sharing across geographies. As we think about the Rubik's Cube where we started here in our conversation this morning, it's not just about products and channels, but it's about a global reach as well. And how can we weave that in here too? Ultimately, we get to the bolded statement down on the bottom of the page. Some back testing that MTV's been able to do across their historical campaigns suggests that they've gotten 15 to 25% increases in effectiveness based on this method of media planning. That's just amazing stuff. And if we flip to the next page, I did promise folks that I would talk a little bit about cost because I'm sure it's in the back of everybody's mind these days. But we do see a huge cost benefit looking at that 15 to 25%. And you see the cost here on the left-hand side of the page. We don't want to hide the ball here from you. But as you look at that break-even point, we know we've got some very large companies in our membership, and in that blue box, we believe, based on some of the back-of-the-envelope calculations, that brands that spend more than $5 million annually on media could expect to boost effectiveness by that $500,000, which clearly offset the cost of that implementation. So from our perspective, certainly, again, don't want to hide the ball on the cost, but even just achieving that benefit of 10% lift in effectiveness of media spend is pretty good, and MTV saw 15 to 25. Certainly some implementation guidance at the bottom of the page in terms of having a reasonably large number of Marcom initiatives, having a significant sample size for your target audience, and certainly having that high quality and variety of consumer data sources that are not currently being factored into key decisions, I think, are appropriate as well. But I would love, at this point, we're sort of nearing the end of the material here, but I wanted to sort of get some final thoughts from the three folks on the phone. We'll maybe start with Rex, and then Todd, and then Damien. Damien, you can finish us off. But anything that we haven't necessarily called out specifically as we've gone through today that you'd sort of like to leave our member participants with while we're on the call?
Don't be intimidated to dive in and get started. I mean, one of the things that I was really impressed with working with Damon was that he approached us and said, look, we have some areas that we want to improve around marketing ROI. We're getting more pressure around the cluster around proving why we're building plans, and we want a more fact-based way of doing it. How do we get started? And really within a few weeks there was progress made and advances in just getting people organized around the ideas and what data and facts they had, and you can make progress very quickly if you just dive in.
Sure. Todd, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think that it's probably no secret to anyone that for many, many years, it's like the relationship between marketing and research has not always been, they weren't BFFs. Mostly because it's like there wasn't a desire to measure, you couldn't really measure creativity and certainly didn't want to be negotiating around those kind of things. But now that pretty much everything can be measured, as Damon said earlier, it's like so critical for both sides to understand how they can meet in the middle where art and science can actually work for good. And this framework is a terrific way of being able to help that actually happen.
And Damon, you get our last word.
Sure. And I think my colleagues definitely covered the main points, and just to echo that it's not a marketing exercise. It's actually a corporate exercise. If there's anyone who tries to go down this road and do this process with the marketing department alone, I don't think it would be successful. It definitely takes, and it requires a lot of kind of collaboration and input from multiple departments so that there is buy-in from a corporate level. So I would just say that while it is a marketing tool and it allows for you to provide value to kind of key business measures, the exercise in itself to make it happen is a corporate issue.
Fantastic. But in wrapping us up, I want to extend just a huge thank you to Damon and Todd from MTV and Rex from Marketing Evolution for joining us here on the call today. I think your thoughts were quite valuable to our members on the phone. I know it gave a lot of additional context to the graphics that we had put on the page, so thank you very much for that. For our members on the phone here today, if there's additional follow-up that you'd like from today's session, in terms of learning a little bit more about the specific tool that MTV Networks used, learning a little bit more about the ins and outs of the case study, do feel free to contact your account manager or executive advisor. More than happy to provide you with those additional details, and the case study itself can be found on the MLC website as well. So again, in closing, thank you all on the phone today for joining us here this morning. And Damon, Todd, Rex, thank you again for your participation. And hopefully we'll get a chance to continue to work together here in the future.